Marcus Chen adjusted his position in the uncomfortable metal chair, trying to ignore the curious stares from his alien classmates. The Advanced Weapons Technology classroom at Kepler Station buzzed with quiet conversations in a dozen different languages. Some he recognized, the clicking sounds of Thacarian, the musical tones of Viridian speech. Others remained completely foreign even after 3 months at the Galactic Military Academy. The human exchange program had seemed like a good idea back on Earth. Marcus had jumped at the chance to study advanced warfare techniques with species that had been fighting interstellar conflicts for thousands of years. What he hadn't expected was to feel so completely outclassed every single day. Attention, cadets! Instructor Vexhai stepped through the doorway, her forearms carrying various pieces of equipment. The Krillion's purple skin gleamed under the artificial lights, and her compound eyes swept across the room with practiced efficiency. Today we begin practical demonstrations of primitive weapon construction. A few snickers came from the back row where the Drakmarian cadets sat. Marcus had learned to recognize their superiority complex early in his stay. To them, any species that hadn't achieved faster-than-light travel before developing nuclear weapons was considered backwards. Each of you will demonstrate your species' most effective pre-industrial weapon, Vexhai continued, setting down her equipment on the central table. You have access only to materials found in this classroom. No energy weapons, no advanced alloys, no nanotech components. Think like your ancestors. Marcus felt his stomach drop. While other species had been perfecting blade work and energy manipulation for millennia, humans had spent most of their pre-industrial period hitting things with rocks and pointy sticks. How was he supposed to compete with cadets whose ancestors had been forging molecular edge blades when humans were still figuring out agriculture? Cadet Zextai, you may begin. Vexai gestured toward a tall, insectoid Manthari in the front row. Zextai stood gracefully, his forearms moving in perfect coordination. From his desk, he gathered several metal styluses, a roll of synthetic tape, and a small power cell from a broken data pad. Within minutes, he had constructed what looked like a staff with crackling energy at both ends. The shock lance, he announced in his buzzing voice. My people use these to hunt the great sand crawlers of Manthos Prime. The electrical discharge paralyzes prey without damaging valuable meat or hide. Impressed murmurs filled the room. Vexhai nodded approvingly and made notes on her datapad. Next came a Viridian cadet named Lyralii. She gathered flexible plastic strips and metal components, weaving them into an intricate pattern. When she finished, she held what appeared to be a simple cord with weighted ends. The Harmony Whip, she said, her melodious voice carrying easily through the room. When spun correctly, it creates subsonic frequencies that disrupt the inner ear of most carbon-based life forms, causing disorientation and nausea. She demonstrated with a slow spin. Even at low speed, Marcus felt a slight dizziness creep over him. Several other cadets stepped back instinctively. The demonstrations continued. A Thacarian cadet built something that looked like a crossbow but fired superheated metal bolts. A Zephyrian created a weapon that generated controlled air pressure waves. Each creation was more impressive than the last, showcasing thousands of years of martial evolution. Finally, Vexhai's compound eyes fixed on Marcus. Cadet Chen. Please demonstrate humanity's contribution to primitive warfare. Marcus stood slowly, his mind racing. Around him, 43 alien cadets waited to see what the primitive human could produce. He scanned the available materials, metal rulers, plastic tubing, synthetic cord, adhesive tape, various small electronic components, even some wooden pencils that the Academy kept for species that preferred traditional writing implements. Wooden pencils. Marcus picked one up, testing its flexibility. It was made from some kind of engineered wood substitute, probably stronger than earth timber but with similar properties. An idea began forming. He gathered several of the longest rulers, titanium alloy, meant to last for decades of student use. From a broken desk lamp, he salvaged a piece of flexible plastic tubing. A roll of high-strength adhesive tape joined his collection, along with a spool of synthetic cord used for binding documents. The room grew quiet as Marcus worked. He had learned this skill during survival training with his grandfather, an old military man who believed in understanding the basics. Start with the frame. Marcus carefully bent one of the metal rulers into a gentle curve, testing its flexibility. Too much tension would snap it, too little would make it useless. Using the tape, he reinforced the curve at several points, then began the delicate process of attaching the second ruler to create the other limb of his bow. The plastic tubing served as additional reinforcement at the stress points where the limbs would take the most punishment. "What exactly is that supposed to be?" asked Kalen, one of the Drakmarian cadets, his voice dripping with amusement.
"It looks like you're making abstract art." Marcus didn't respond.
He was focused on the most critical part, creating the string. The synthetic cord was strong enough, but he needed to find the right length and tension.
Too loose and the bow would be ineffective. Too tight and it would snap under pressure or, worse, break the frame.
He tied one end of the cord to the top of his improvised bow, then carefully bent the frame to attach the other end. The metal rulers creaked ominously but held.
Marcus plucked the string experimentally.
The sound was sharp and clear, a good sign.
Now he needed projectiles.
The pencils were too light and unbalanced, but they gave him an idea. He gathered several metal styluses, the kind used for precise work on data pads. They were the right length and weight, but lacked fletching for stability. From his notebook, Marcus carefully tore strips of paper. Using tiny amounts of adhesive tape, he created makeshift flights for his improvised arrows. They wouldn't be perfect, but they should fly reasonably straight over short distances. "Fascinating," murmured Instructor Vexai, moving closer to observe.
"I don't recognize the design principle."
Marcus knocked his first arrow, a modified stylus with paper flights. He drew back carefully, feeling the resistance of the improvised string against the bent rulers. The whole contraption felt fragile in his hands, but it held together.
"The bow," Marcus said simply. "Humans developed this approximately 30,000 years ago. It stores energy in the bent limbs and transfers that energy to a projectile."
He aimed at the far wall, where a practice target had been set up for the demonstrations. At 20 meters, it wasn't an impossible shot, but, with improvised equipment, it would take some skill.
Marcus released.
The arrow flew true, striking the target just left of center with a satisfying thunk. Several cadets exchanged surprised glances. "The effectiveness lies not in the individual shot," Marcus continued, reaching for his second arrow, "but in the rate of fire and range." He knocked, drew, and released in one smooth motion. This shot hit closer to the center. A third arrow followed quickly, then a fourth. In less than 20 seconds, Marcus had put 6 arrows into the target, creating a tight grouping near the center. "Impressive accuracy," acknowledged Sextai, "but my shock lance would be more effective in close combat." Marcus nodded respectfully.
"In close combat, yes.
But this weapon excels at range. On Earth, skilled archers could accurately hit targets at distances over 200 meters.
200 meters? Lyralii sounded skeptical. With that primitive construction? "The design scales up," Marcus explained, setting down his improvised bow.
"With proper materials, laminated wood, horn, sinew, or modern composites, a bow becomes much more powerful. Some ancient earth bows could drive arrows through armor that would stop sword strikes."
Cadet Kalen stood up, his reptilian features showing clear disdain. "Even if that's true, it's still just a simple projectile weapon. Any modern armor would render it useless." Marcus considered this. "You're right about modern armor.
But the bow isn't just about the projectile. It's about the philosophy behind it."
"Philosophy?"
Instructor Vexai's compound eyes focused intently on Marcus. "Most weapons require you to close distance with your enemy," Marcus continued. "Swords, spears, even energy lances, they put you in immediate danger.
The bow allows you to strike from concealment, from safety. It changes the entire dynamic of combat."
He picked up one of his improvised arrows, examining the paper fletching. On Earth, a single archer could hold off multiple attackers by controlling range and terrain.
Entire armies changed their tactics because of the bow.
It made individual skill more important than raw strength or superior technology.
"Interesting theory," said Vexai, making more notes. "But, can you demonstrate this tactical advantage with your classroom materials?" Marcus looked around the room, assessing the layout.
The other weapons his classmates had built were impressive but required close proximity to be effective. His bow, primitive as it was, could reach any target in the room. "The bow teaches patience," he said, knocking another arrow.
"Watch." Instead of aiming at the target, Marcus drew and held the position.
The other cadets shifted nervously as they realized he could strike any of them from across the room. The psychological effect was immediate, they all became acutely aware of their positions relative to his line of sight. In Earth history, armies of archers could break cavalry charges before the horses got within 100 meters, Marcus continued, still holding his draw. They could disrupt formations, target leaders, and create chaos without ever engaging in hand-to-hand combat. He released the arrow into the target again, then, immediately nocked another. Rapid, accurate, long-range fire. That's the advantage. Instructor Vexhai studied the improvised bow with new interest. The energy storage mechanism is elegant in its simplicity. And, you constructed this entirely from classroom materials? Yes, ma'am. The principles are straightforward once you understand them. Any flexible material can be made into a bow with the right techniques. Even in an emergency situation, she pressed. Without tools or preparation time? Marcus nodded. Humans have made functional bows from everything from tree branches to industrial materials. In survival situations, it's often the first weapon we construct because it's effective and requires minimal resources. A Thacarian cadet clicked thoughtfully. This suggests humans developed ranged combat expertise very early in their evolution. Persistence hunting, Marcus confirmed. We couldn't outrun our prey or overpower it directly, so we learned to wear it down from a distance. The bow was a natural extension of that strategy. Kalen scoffed again, but with less conviction than before. Still primitive compared to modern weapons. Maybe, Marcus agreed. But, consider this, every principle of modern ballistics started with the bow. Trajectory calculation, windage compensation, target leading, even the physics of energy transfer. When humans finally developed projectile weapons that used chemical propellants, we already understood everything about accurate long-range shooting. He demonstrated by shooting several more arrows in quick succession, each one finding the target despite the improvised construction. The bow taught us to think like snipers thousands of years before we invented rifles. Instructor Vexhai approached the target, examining the arrow groupings. The consistency is remarkable given the crude materials. What's the effective range of your construction? Marcus considered the question carefully. With these materials? Maybe 30 to 40 meters for accurate shots. But, that's a limitation of the improvised construction, not the design itself. And, with proper materials? A well-made bow can kill at distances over 300 meters in skilled hands, Marcus replied. Some specialized designs could reach even further. English longbows at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415 were effective against armored knights at ranges that would surprise most modern military historians. The room had grown completely quiet. Even the Drukmarian cadets were listening intently now. The real advantage isn't just range, though, Marcus continued. It's versatility. Different arrow types for different targets, broadheads for soft targets, bodkins for armor, fire arrows for siege work, even specialized arrows for cutting rope or carrying messages. He pointed to his improvised arrows. These are just basic points, but, on Earth, we developed dozens of specialized arrow designs. Some were designed to wound rather than kill, creating a burden on enemy medical resources. Others were meant to penetrate specific types of armor or destroy equipment. Zextai's mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was a sign of deep thought. This weapon system seems to have driven significant tactical innovation among humans. It shaped entire civilizations, Marcus confirmed. The societies that mastered archery often dominated those that didn't. It was one of the great equalizers in human warfare, a skilled archer could bring down the most heavily armored warrior. Instructor Vexhai walked back to her desk, but Marcus could see she was still processing what she had observed. The demonstration is complete, but I would like to see more detailed analysis of the construction techniques. Can you document your process? Of course, ma'am. Marcus began carefully disassembling his improvised bow, laying out each component. The key is understanding the physics of energy storage and release. The bent limbs store potential energy, which converts to kinetic energy when released. As he explained the construction process, Marcus noticed that several of his classmates were taking notes. Even Kalen seemed grudgingly interested in the technical details. The most important factor is matching the bow's power to the archer's strength, Marcus continued. A bow that's too powerful can't be drawn consistently. One that's too weak won't deliver enough energy to be effective. Lyrelii asked, how did ancient humans determine the correct power level?
Trial and error, mostly.
Master bowyers developed techniques for measuring draw weight and matching it to individual archers. But even children could use light bows effectively, making it a weapon that entire populations could learn.
Entire populations? Vexhai looked up from her notes. Marcus nodded.
On Earth, some cultures required all males to practice archery regularly by law. The English mandated Sunday archery practice for centuries. It created a military force where ordinary farmers and craftsmen could devastate professional armies.
The implications hung in the air.
A weapon so simple that civilians could master it, yet effective enough to change the course of battles against trained warriors with superior equipment.
This concludes today's demonstrations, Instructor Vexhai announced finally. I want detailed reports from each of you on the tactical implications of your chosen weapons. Do next class period.
As the cadets began filing out, several stopped to examine Marcus's improvised bow more closely. The Thacarian student, whose name Marcus remembered as Clixtai, lingered longest. I must admit, Clixtai clicked, I did not expect such sophistication from human primitive weapons.
The psychological warfare aspects are particularly intriguing. Marcus smiled.
Wait until you hear about what we did with cavalry charges. For the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, Marcus felt like he had something valuable to contribute. The bow might be ancient technology, but the principles behind it had shaped human thinking about warfare in ways that even advanced alien civilizations might find useful. As he packed his materials, Marcus caught Instructor Vexhai watching him with what might have been respect.
Tomorrow's class was going to be very interesting.
Word of Marcus's bow demonstration spread through Kepler Station faster than he expected. By the time he reached the cafeteria for evening meal, conversation stopped as he passed various tables. Some looks were curious, others skeptical, and a few openly hostile. Marcus chose a table near the viewport, where Earth's pale blue dot was visible among the stars. The familiar sight helped calm his nerves as he picked at his nutrition cube, a flavorless but perfectly balanced meal that supposedly met the dietary needs of 47 different species.
Mind if we join you?
Marcus looked up to find Zextai approaching with two other cadets he recognized but hadn't spoken to before. A compact, blue-skinned humanoid with silver markings that indicated Arctican heritage, and something that looked like a walking plant with crystalline growths along its arms.
Please, sit.
Marcus gestured to the empty chairs. The Arctican extended a three-fingered hand.
Cadet Nixera, Communications Division. This is Cadet Thorn from Engineering.
The plant being rustled what might have been a greeting. I've been thinking about your demonstration, Zextai said, settling his insectoid frame into a chair designed for more conventional anatomy. The range advantage is obvious, but I'm curious about ammunition sustainability. Marcus swallowed a particularly challenging bite of nutrition cube.
What do you mean? Your shock lance, Nixera interjected, requires power cells.
Lyraliai's Harmony Whip needs calibrated weights.
But your bow just needs arrows. How difficult are they to produce?
That's the beauty of it, Marcus replied.
Arrows can be made from almost anything.
Wood, metal, bone, even hardened paper in an emergency.
The basic design is so simple that any materials workshop could produce them.
Thorn's crystalline growths pulsed with soft light, their species equivalent of nodding.
Resource efficiency.
Important in extended campaigns.
Exactly.
Marcus warmed to the subject. In Earth's medieval period, armies would employ entire units of fletchers and arrowsmiths. They could produce hundreds of arrows daily with basic tools. Zextai's mandibles clicked thoughtfully.
But surely the arrows would be recovered and reused?
Sometimes, but many were considered expendable. A single archer might carry 60 to 100 arrows into battle.
The idea was to put so many projectiles downrange that the enemy couldn't function effectively. Nixera leaned forward. Volume of fire over individual accuracy?
Both, actually. Skilled archers were accurate, but even average ones could contribute by maintaining constant pressure. It's like suppressing fire, but with individual weapons instead of crew-served systems. The conversation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Marcus looked up to see Kalen and 3 other Drakmarian cadets surrounding their table. The reptilian beings were tall and imposing, with scales that shifted color to reflect their emotional state. Right now, those scales showed deep red, anger or aggression. The human and his primitive stick tricks, Kalen said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. How amusing that you found others willing to listen to Stone Age stories. Marcus kept his voice level. Just having a discussion about tactical applications. Tactical applications? Kalen's scales rippled with what Marcus had learned was amusement. Against real weapons? Against real warriors? He gestured to his companions. Show them, Vorth. One of the other Drakmarians stepped forward, drawing what looked like an ornate knife. Except it wasn't just a knife, energy crackled along the blade's edge, and Marcus could feel the heat from 2 meters away. Molecular Edge Disruptor, Vorth announced proudly. It cuts through any known material below the atomic level. Your little arrows would be sliced in half before they reached their target. Impressive, Marcus acknowledged. And the weapon represented technology that Earth wouldn't achieve for decades, if ever. Or this, another Drakmarian added, activating what appeared to be a small shield generator. A shimmering barrier materialized in front of him. Personal defense fields. Your arrows would never penetrate. Thorn's crystals pulsed rapidly, their species sign of distress. Nixera's skin had shifted to a pale gray. Even Zextai seemed to shrink back from the display of advanced weaponry. Marcus studied the energy blade and shield. Both were undeniably effective against conventional projectiles. But every weapon had limitations, and every defense had weaknesses. The key was understanding the underlying principles. You're absolutely right, Marcus said finally. In a direct confrontation, those weapons would defeat arrows easily. Kalen's scales shifted to a satisfied orange. Finally, some sense from the primitive. But, Marcus continued, weapons aren't used in isolation. They're part of larger tactical systems. He gestured toward the shield generator. How long does that field last? 8 hours continuous operation, the Drakmarian replied proudly. And the power source? Quantum battery pack. Standard military issue. Marcus nodded. So after 8 hours, you need to replace or recharge the battery. What happens to your defense during that process? The Drakmarian hesitated. The field goes down temporarily, but the changeover only takes 30 seconds. 30 seconds, Marcus repeated thoughtfully. And the molecular edge disruptor, how many targets can it engage simultaneously? Vorth's scales darkened slightly. One at a time, obviously. But each strike is lethal. Right. One at a time. Marcus stood up slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. Now imagine you're facing not one archer, but 100. Or 1,000. Numbers don't matter when each individual is inferior, Kalen insisted. Don't they? Marcus pulled out his datapad and began sketching quickly. Let's run some calculations. Your shield stops arrows, but it takes power to do so. Each impact drains energy from the battery. How many arrow impacts can it absorb before the power runs low? The Drakmarians exchanged glances. This clearly wasn't a specification they had considered. And your molecular disruptor, Marcus continued, turning to Vorth. Impressive range and accuracy, I'm sure. But what's the rate of fire? I can strike once every 1.2 seconds, Vorth replied defensively. So in 1 minute, you can engage 50 targets. But if there are 100 archers, and each one can shoot 10 arrows in that same minute. Marcus showed his rough calculations on the datapad screen. That's 1,000 projectiles incoming while you eliminate 50 sources. Nixera's skin had shifted back to normal blue as she followed the logic. The remainder would overwhelm the defender. This is ridiculous, Kalen snapped. You're talking about massing primitive forces against superior individuals. That's not how modern warfare works. Isn't it? Marcus asked. What do you think a missile swarm attack is? Or a drone mass assault? The principle is the same, use numbers and coordination to overwhelm superior individual capability. Zextai's compound eyes focused intently on the discussion. You're suggesting that humans developed asymmetric warfare tactics out of necessity? Exactly. We learned early that we couldn't outfight stronger opponents individually, so we developed ways to fight as coordinated groups. The bow wasn't just a weapon, it was a force multiplier that let ordinary humans become effective against superior enemies.
Thorn's crystals pulsed in a pattern Marcus was beginning to recognize as excitement. This explains human military doctrine.
Your species emphasizes combined arms and coordinated tactics over individual superiority.
Right. A knight in full armor was nearly invincible against individual opponents.
But a formation of archers could bring down dozens of knights before they closed to combat range.
It changed the entire nature of warfare.
Kalen's scales were cycling through frustrated colors.
You're talking about ancient history. Modern personal defense systems can handle multiple threats. Can they?
Marcus challenged gently.
What if the arrows are just the opening move? What if they're followed by other attacks? Or what if they're used to force you into disadvantageous positions?
He began sketching on his data pad again.
Imagine you're defending a fortified position.
Your shields and energy weapons make you nearly invulnerable to direct assault. But then, arrows start falling from above, not targeting you directly, but carrying incendiary compounds.
Or chemical agents.
Or even just making noise to mask the approach of other attackers.
Psychological warfare, Nixera murmured. Using the arrows to create stress and uncertainty. Exactly.
On Earth, armies used to shoot arrows with burning cloth attached to set fire to enemy camps.
Or arrows with messages to demoralize defenders.
Or just massive volleys to create fear and confusion. Marcus pulled up historical data from his personal files. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, English archers broke the charge of French heavy cavalry not just by killing horses and riders, but by creating such a storm of projectiles that the survivors couldn't maintain formation or morale. Vorth deactivated his energy blade, looking thoughtful.
You're suggesting that the psychological impact was as important as the physical damage? Sometimes more important.
A warrior who knows he's being watched by hidden archers fights differently than one who feels safe.
He moves more cautiously, exposes himself less, splits his attention between offense and defense.
Battlefield control, Thorn observed, crystals pulsing slowly.
Shaping enemy behavior through threat projection. Marcus nodded. The Bao taught humans that you don't have to destroy every enemy to win. You just have to make their position untenable.
Kalen had been unusually quiet during this exchange. Now he spoke up, his voice more measured than before. These are interesting theories, but they assume the archers remain undetected and unengaged. That's why humans also developed camouflage, fieldcraft, and mobile tactics, Marcus replied. The Bao worked best when combined with other force multipliers, terrain advantage, concealment, mobility, and coordination. He pulled up another historical reference.
English and Welsh longbowmen didn't just stand in the open and shoot.
They used stakes and obstacles to funnel enemy approaches, positioned themselves on high ground for better angles and longer range, and maintained escape routes in case their positions were overrun.
Combined arms doctrine, Zextai buzzed approvingly. Each element supporting the others. Right.
The Bao wasn't a complete military system by itself, it was a tool that enabled other tactical innovations.
It taught humans to think systematically about warfare instead of just relying on individual prowess.
Nixera was taking notes on her own datapad now.
This suggests that humans developed sophisticated military thinking much earlier than most species assume.
We had to, Marcus said simply. We weren't the strongest or fastest or toughest species on our own planet. But we learned to think, plan, and work together in ways that made us more effective than our individual capabilities suggested. One of the other Drickmarians, who had been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up.
This is why humans adapted so quickly to space warfare, isn't it? You were already thinking in terms of complex tactical systems.
Marcus considered the question carefully.
Probably. When humans first encountered alien technology, we didn't try to copy it directly.
We studied how it worked and, then, figured out ways to integrate it with our existing tactical doctrines.
The principles we learned from ancient weapons like the Bao still influence how we approach modern combat. Fascinating, Vorth admitted, though his scales still showed some skepticism. But surely there are limits to how far these ancient principles can be applied? Are there? Marcus asked. What's a railgun except a bow that uses magnetic fields instead of bent limbs? What's a guided missile except an arrow with its own navigation system?
The physics of projectile weapons haven't changed, we've just found more efficient ways to store and transfer energy.
The group fell silent as they considered this.
Even Kalen seemed to be grudgingly accepting that the discussion had moved beyond simple primitive versus advanced comparisons. "I think," Sextai said finally, "that we may have underestimated the sophistication of human military thought. Your species has clearly been thinking about these problems for a very long time."
Marcus smiled. "Longer than you might guess.
And we're still learning. That's why I'm here, to understand how other species approach these same fundamental challenges. Perhaps," Kalen said slowly, "there might be some value in understanding these traditional approaches." His scales had shifted to a more neutral green. "I'd be happy to demonstrate more techniques," Marcus offered.
The bow is just one example. Humans developed all sorts of solutions for asymmetric warfare situations. Nixera looked excited. "Could you show us some of the tactical formations you mentioned? The ones that allowed archers to defeat heavy cavalry?"
"Sure.
But it would be better with actual demonstration. Maybe we could arrange something in the combat simulation facility?" Thorn's crystals brightened considerably. "Excellent idea. Computer simulations could model the effectiveness of various approaches."
As the group began discussing possibilities for further demonstrations, Marcus felt a growing sense of satisfaction.
He had started the day feeling completely outclassed by his alien classmates.
Now he was beginning to realize that humans might have more to contribute than he had initially thought. The conversation continued late into the evening, ranging from historical tactics to modern applications. By the time they parted ways, several cadets had requested copies of Marcus's historical military files. Even Kalen had grudgingly expressed interest in seeing a simulation of medieval archery tactics. Walking back to his quarters, Marcus reflected on how much the day had changed his perspective. The bow demonstration had opened unexpected doors, not just to show off human ingenuity, but to share the deeper principles that had shaped his species' approach to conflict.
Tomorrow's advanced tactics class was going to be very interesting indeed.
The tactical simulation chamber hummed with activity as Marcus worked with the technician to input parameters for the historical battle scenario. 3 days had passed since his impromptu discussion in the cafeteria, and word had spread throughout the academy. What started as a small group interested in archery tactics had grown into a formal demonstration with over 60 cadets in attendance. Commander Torben, the Academy's Director of Strategic Studies, stood at the observation deck with several other instructors. The Korthax officer's tentacles moved in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated deep concentration.
Having the senior staff present added pressure to an already challenging situation.
"The simulation is ready," Cadet Chen announced the technician, a nervous Viridian whose silver hair flickered with stress patterns. "We've modeled the Battle of Agincourt as closely as possible using historical data from your archives." Marcus nodded, reviewing the display parameters one final time. The simulation showed a muddy field in northern France, October 25, 1415. On one side, a force of English archers and men-at-arms numbering approximately 6,000. On the other, nearly 25,000 French knights, crossbowmen, and infantry. "The odds seem rather unfavorable for your humans," observed Instructor Vexhai, her compound eyes studying the force ratio displayed on the main screen. "That's exactly the point," Marcus replied. "This battle is considered one of the most decisive examples of how tactical innovation can overcome numerical and technological superiority."
Zextai raised one of his forearms. "Before we begin, could you explain the technological disparity?"
"I want to understand what advantages the French forces possessed." Marcus gestured to the simulation display, where individual units were represented by detailed holographic models. The French knights wore full-plate armor that could deflect most weapons of the time. Their warhorses were trained for combat and added tremendous mass to their charges. They also had crossbows, which were more powerful than English longbows at short range.
"And the English advantages?" asked Nixera, her blue skin showing patterns of curiosity.
"Terrain, position, and about 5,000 longbowmen who had trained since childhood."
Marcus highlighted the English forces on the display.
The French had to attack across a muddy field that had been churned up by recent rains.
The English chose their position carefully.
Commander Torben's tentacles stilled.
"Show us." Marcus activated the simulation.
The holographic battlefield came alive with thousands of tiny figures moving in historically accurate formations.
The English positioned themselves in a narrow field between two woods. This meant the French couldn't use their numerical advantage to flank or surround the smaller force.
The French army began its advance in the simulation, heavy cavalry in the lead followed by dismounted knights and men-at-arms. It looked like an unstoppable avalanche of steel and muscle.
The first key moment, Marcus continued, was the English provocation.
They fired a few volleys to anger the French into attacking prematurely.
A small shower of arrows arced across the battlefield.
It seemed insignificant compared to the massive French force, but the psychological effect was immediate. The simulated French knights spurred their horses forward, abandoning their careful formation.
Psychological manipulation, Commander Torvin observed approvingly. Using the enemy's aggression against them.
Now watch the ground conditions, Marcus said. The French cavalry had to cross nearly 300 meters of soft, muddy terrain. Their horses tired quickly, and the formation became stretched out. On the display, the tight formation of French knights began to string out as some horses moved faster than others. The neat lines became an irregular mob struggling through the mud.
Aerostorm begins, now, Marcus announced. What happened next silenced the observation deck.
The English archers, arranged in wedge formations along the flanks, began shooting in coordinated volleys.
Clouds of arrows darkened the sky before falling like deadly rain on the struggling French cavalry.
Each archer is shooting 12 arrows per minute, Marcus explained as the simulation showed the devastating effect. That's 60,000 arrows in the first minute alone, all concentrated on a narrow front where the French can't deploy their full numbers. The holographic knights began falling in droves. Horses crashed to the ground, throwing riders or crushing them under their weight. The charge that had looked unstoppable moments before dissolved into chaos. Kalen, who had been watching with obvious skepticism, spoke up.
The simulation must be exaggerating the effectiveness.
No primitive weapon could cause such devastation.
Actually, it's probably conservative, Marcus replied, pausing the simulation.
Historical accounts describe the arrow fall as so thick it darkened the sky.
And, remember, these aren't modern recreational bows.
English war bows had draw weights of 150 pounds or more. At close range, they could penetrate mail armor and even some early plate designs. He highlighted one of the fallen knights on the display. But, the real effectiveness wasn't just about penetrating armor. A horse is a much larger target, and a wounded horse becomes uncontrollable. Even if the knight survived the fall, he was now afoot in heavy armor, exhausted from the charge, and still under arrow fire. The psychological impact on the survivors must have been severe, observed Instructor Vexhigh.
Exactly.
Imagine you're a knight who's trained all your life for single combat, wearing the best armor money can buy, riding a destrier worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Suddenly, you're surrounded by dying horses and wounded comrades, with arrows falling like rain from enemies you can barely see. Marcus resumed the simulation. The surviving French knights reached the English lines, but their numbers were drastically reduced and their formation completely broken.
What followed was a brutal melee where the English numerical disadvantage had been largely eliminated.
The second wave of French attacks fared no better, Marcus continued as the simulation showed subsequent charges. They had to attack over ground littered with their own dead, which further disrupted their formations. Thorn's crystals pulsed rapidly.
The archers continued shooting even during the melee phase? Some of them. Others drew swords and joined the hand-to-hand fighting.
That's another advantage of the bow, it doesn't make you helpless in close combat if you carry backup weapons. The simulation concluded with a decisive English victory. The final casualty count appeared on the display, French losses estimated at 6,000 to 10,000, including much of their nobility.
English losses numbered fewer than 100.
The observation deck remained quiet for several moments as the implications sank in.
Finally, Commander Torvin spoke. This suggests that humans developed combined arms tactics much earlier than our xenological studies indicated. The bow forced us to think systematically about warfare, Marcus agreed. You can't just hand someone a longbow and expect them to be effective. It takes years of training to build the strength and skill needed. So armies had to invest in long-term training programs, which led to professional military thinking. What kind of training regimen? Asked Sextai.
Marcus pulled up another file from his datapad. English archers often started training as children. The bow required such specific muscle development that skeletal remains of medieval archers show distinctive bone deformation from years of practice. Some historians call it archer's shoulder.
Nixera's skin patterns showed fascination. Your species was willing to physically modify individuals for military effectiveness?
Not intentionally, it was just a side effect of the training intensity required. But it shows how seriously archery was taken. Master archers were valued military assets, not disposable soldiers.
Commander Torben descended from the observation deck to examine the simulation controls more closely. Can you demonstrate other tactical applications?
This battle showed archers used defensively, but surely they had offensive capabilities as well.
Absolutely. Marcus began loading a different scenario. This is the Mongol conquest tactics under Genghis Khan. Completely different approach to archery warfare. The new simulation showed the steppes of Central Asia, with Mongol horse archers facing a traditional infantry formation. The tactical situation looked completely different from the medieval European battlefield.
The Mongols combined archery with mobility, Marcus explained as the simulation began. Instead of standing in formation and trading volleys, they used hit-and-run tactics to wear down enemies while avoiding direct confrontation. The holographic Mongol riders swept toward the infantry formation, shot volleys of arrows at close range, then wheeled away before the enemy could respond effectively. They repeated this maneuver from different angles, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned down. Each rider carries multiple bows of different weights for different situations, Marcus continued. Light bows for rapid shooting during harassment, heavy bows for armor penetration when the opportunity arises.
This is a completely different tactical philosophy, observed Instructor Vexhai. The English used archery to create killing zones. The Mongols used it for strategic mobility.
Right. And both approaches were devastatingly effective against opponents who didn't understand the principles involved. Marcus highlighted the casualty patterns on the display. Traditional infantry formations were designed to resist cavalry charges and infantry assaults. They had no effective response to sustained arrow fire from multiple directions. The simulation showed the inevitable result: the infantry formation gradually disintegrated under the constant harassment, with soldiers breaking ranks to chase elusive horse archers who simply rode away from any pursuit. The Mongols conquered the largest contiguous land empire in history using these tactics, Marcus continued. They defeated Chinese armies that outnumbered them 10-1, overran European heavy cavalry, and destroyed fortified cities across 3 continents. Kalen's scales had shifted to deep purple, his species color for serious contemplation. These tactics seem to emphasize indirect engagement over decisive battle.
Exactly. The Mongols understood that you don't have to destroy an army to defeat it. You just have to make it ineffective.
Constant harassment, disrupted supply lines, exhausted troops, broken morale, all of these achieve strategic objectives without requiring direct confrontation.
Commander Torben was studying the tactical displays with obvious interest.
This suggests that human military doctrine emphasizes adaptability and system-level thinking over individual combat prowess.
We had to, Marcus replied.
Most other species on Earth were individually superior to humans in some way. We survived by being smarter, more cooperative, and more adaptable than our competitors. Which explains your success in space warfare, the commander mused.
Human fleets consistently outperform predictions based purely on technological capabilities.
Marcus felt a surge of pride but tried to keep his response modest.
We build on thousands of years of experience in asymmetric warfare.
The tools change, but the principles remain the same. Thorn's crystals had been pulsing in complex patterns throughout the demonstration.
Could you show us some defensive archery applications? Ways the bow could be used to protect rather than attack?
Marcus loaded another simulation file.
Siege defense.
This is the historical siege of Constantinople in 1453, though I should note, this one didn't end well for the defenders. The new display showed a massive fortified city surrounded by an enormous Ottoman army. The scale was breathtaking, hundreds of thousands of attackers against a few thousand defenders. The Byzantine defenders used a combination of Greek fire, crossbows, and composite bows to hold off attacks for nearly 2 months, Marcus explained.
Even though they ultimately lost, they inflicted casualties far out of proportion to their numbers.
The simulation showed waves of Ottoman attackers advancing against the walls, only to be met by coordinated arrow fire from the battlements. The defenders had positioned their archers to create overlapping fields of fire, ensuring that any approach to the walls would be covered by multiple shooters.
Notice the positioning, Marcus pointed out.
Archers are placed at different elevations and angles to maximize coverage. They're also protected by the fortifications, which means they can shoot with relative safety while attackers are completely exposed. Force multiplication through terrain advantage, Commander Torvin observed.
The physical environment becomes part of the weapon system. Exactly. And, because arrows can be manufactured locally using simple tools, the defenders could maintain their rate of fire much longer than if they had relied on more complex weapons.
Zexdai's mandibles clicked thoughtfully.
This demonstrates another advantage of bow technology: logistical sustainability. Complex weapons require complex supply chains.
That's a crucial point for space operations, Marcus agreed.
In extended deployments, the ability to manufacture ammunition from local materials could be decisive. The observation deck fell silent again as the cadets and instructors processed the implications.
Marcus had started with a simple demonstration of an improvised bow, but the discussion had evolved into a comprehensive analysis of human military philosophy. Finally, Instructor Vexai spoke up.
Cadet Chen, would you be willing to develop a formal curriculum on human military history and tactical evolution? I believe the Academy could benefit from this perspective.
Marcus felt his heart rate accelerate. This was far more than he had hoped for when he first arrived at Kepler Station.
I would be honored, ma'am.
Though I think it would be valuable to include other cadets in the development process, particularly those from species with similar evolutionary pressures. Commander Torvin's tentacles moved in what Marcus had learned was approval.
Agreed.
We'll establish a working group to study comparative military evolution across species.
This could provide valuable insights for modern strategic planning.
As the formal presentation concluded and cadets began filing out of the simulation chamber, Marcus found himself surrounded by beings eager to discuss specific aspects of what they had seen. The questions ranged from technical details about bow construction to broader philosophical questions about warfare and society. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, Marcus felt like he truly belonged. The bow had been just the beginning, a simple demonstration that had opened doors to much larger conversations about how different species approached the fundamental challenges of conflict and survival. The alien cadets who had initially dismissed human capabilities were now eager to learn from human experience. And Marcus was beginning to understand that every species had valuable lessons to share, if only they took the time to look beyond surface assumptions about primitive and advanced technologies. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, Marcus Chen felt ready for whatever came next. 6 weeks after the initial bow demonstration, Marcus found himself standing before the Academy's full faculty council in the Grand Assembly Chamber. The circular room could accommodate representatives from 47 different species, and, today, it seemed like most of them were present. The morning light from Kepler Station's primary star cast rainbow patterns through the crystalline walls, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere for what had become the most important presentation of his life.
Cadet Chen, Admiral Kretak's voice resonated through the chamber's acoustic system.
The Vorthan commander's bioluminescent patches flickered in patterns that Marcus had learned indicated formal authority. Your preliminary report on comparative military evolution has generated considerable interest throughout the Galactic Defense Council. Today, we want to see the full scope of your research. Marcus activated his presentation system, and the chamber's central hologram projector came to life. Three-dimensional images of various weapons and battle formations materialized in the air above the assembled faculty. 6 weeks ago, I demonstrated a simple bow constructed from classroom materials, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly in the chamber's perfect acoustics. Today, I want to show you how that demonstration led to insights that could reshape our understanding of military effectiveness across species. The hologram shifted to display a complex diagram showing evolutionary timelines for dozens of different species. Marcus had spent weeks compiling this data with help from cadets representing various civilizations. Every species in this chamber developed weapons technology, but we all took different paths based on our unique evolutionary pressures. Marcus highlighted several data points on the timeline. The Thacarians developed energy manipulation early because their homeworld has natural electromagnetic fields. The Krillians mastered metalworking because of abundant mineral resources. Humans developed projectile weapons because we were physically inferior to most threats on Earth.
Admiral Kretak's patches shifted to a questioning pattern. This is established xenological knowledge, Cadet.
What new insights have you discovered? The insight isn't about the weapons themselves, Marcus replied, but about how different evolutionary pressures created different approaches to strategic thinking. The hologram changed to show a three-dimensional tactical analysis of the Battle of Agincourt, but this time overlaid with similar battles from other species' histories. Marcus had identified conflicts where smaller, technologically inferior forces had defeated larger, more advanced opponents. The Zephyrian Wind Dancer Rebellion, the Manthari Hive Wars, the Arctic and resource conflicts, all of these share common patterns with human military victories. The successful forces adapted their tactics to exploit systemic weaknesses in superior opponents. Commander Torvin leaned forward, his tentacles moving in patterns of intense interest.
You're suggesting there are universal principles of asymmetric warfare?
Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Regardless of species or technology level, certain tactical concepts appear repeatedly in successful military campaigns. Force multiplication, terrain advantage, psychological warfare, logistical disruption, and adaptive coordination.
The holographic display shifted again, showing a complex matrix comparing military doctrines across species.
Marcus had spent countless hours analyzing historical data, looking for patterns that transcended individual technologies or cultural differences. For example, Marcus continued, highlighting specific data points, every successful military force has developed some form of combined arms doctrine. The specific weapons vary, but the principle of integrating different capabilities to support each other appears to be universal. Instructor Vexhi's compound eyes focused intently on the display. The implications for modern fleet tactics are significant. We've been focusing on technological advancement, but perhaps we should be studying integration methodology.
That's one of the key findings, Marcus agreed.
The species that achieve the most decisive victories aren't necessarily the ones with the best individual technologies. They're the ones that best integrate their available capabilities into coherent tactical systems.
Admiral Kretak's bioluminescent pattern shifted to indicate deep consideration.
Show us specific examples. Marcus activated a new series of simulations, these ones featuring modern space combat scenarios. Working with cadets from 12 different species, we've identified ways that traditional tactical principles can enhance modern military effectiveness.
The first simulation showed a standard fleet engagement between two forces of equal technological capability.
The battle proceeded according to conventional doctrine, with both sides trading long-range fire until one fleet was destroyed.
Now, the same engagement using integrated asymmetric principles, Marcus announced. The second simulation started identically, but quickly diverged.
The smaller fleet used coordinated maneuvers reminiscent of Mongol horse archer tactics, striking from multiple vectors while avoiding decisive engagement.
Smaller ships used bow-inspired principles of rapid, accurate fire to disrupt enemy formations while larger vessels exploited the confusion to deliver decisive strikes.
The battle duration is reduced by 40%, Marcus reported as the simulation concluded. Casualties to the implementing fleet are down by 60%, while enemy losses increase by 30%.
A murmur ran through the assembled faculty.
These weren't theoretical improvements, they represented potentially decisive advantages in real combat situations.
How reliable are these simulations? Asked Professor Thilnax, the Zentari head of military engineering.
Her crystalline form resonated with harmonic frequencies that indicated skepticism. We've run over 500 variations using different force compositions and tactical situations, Marcus replied.
The principles remain consistent across scenarios. More importantly, we've identified why these approaches work.
The hologram shifted to display a detailed analysis of information flow and decision-making patterns during combat. Marcus had worked with Nixera and several other communications specialists to map how different tactical approaches affected command and control effectiveness. Traditional military doctrine assumes that superior technology and training will produce predictable advantages, Marcus explained. But asymmetric tactics deliberately create unpredictability, forcing opponents to react to situations they haven't prepared for. He highlighted specific data points on the analysis. When facing unexpected tactical approaches, even highly trained forces show decreased effectiveness as commanders struggle to adapt their standard procedures. Commander Torvin's tentacles moved in patterns of excitement.
This suggests that tactical innovation could provide advantages even against technologically superior opponents.
Exactly. And the beauty of these principles is that they scale. The same concepts that allowed human archers to defeat armored knights can enable smaller fleets to outmaneuver larger ones. Admiral Kretak stood, her full height impressive even in a chamber designed for diverse species.
Cadet Chen, these findings have potential applications far beyond academic interest. The Galactic Defense Council has been struggling with strategic challenges posed by the Void Hunters. Their technology is often superior to ours, but their tactical doctrine appears rigid. Marcus felt a chill at the mention of the Void Hunters. The aggressive expansionist species had been pressing against the borders of known space for months, and conventional military responses had proven inadequate. Have you considered applying these principles to current strategic challenges? The Admiral continued. Marcus exchanged glances with his fellow cadets in the observation section. This was far beyond anything he had imagined when he first built a bow from classroom supplies. We've done some preliminary analysis, Marcus replied carefully. But implementing these concepts would require cooperation between multiple species and substantial changes to existing military doctrine. Show us, Admiral Kretak commanded. Marcus activated his most ambitious simulation yet. The holographic display showed a section of the galactic border where Void Hunter incursions had been most successful. Instead of trying to match their technological advantages, the simulation employed integrated asymmetric principles drawn from a dozen different species' military traditions. The key is not to fight the Void Hunters on their terms, Marcus explained as the simulation began. Their advantages are technological superiority and standardized tactics. But standardization becomes a weakness when facing truly adaptive opponents. The simulation showed galactic defense forces using human-inspired mobility tactics, Mongol-style harassment strategies, and the Carrion energy manipulation to create a constantly shifting tactical environment. Instead of engaging in direct battles, the Allied forces disrupted Void Hunter logistics, exploited their rigid command structure, and forced them into situations where their technological advantages couldn't be effectively applied. The projected effectiveness is remarkable, Admiral Kretak observed, studying the simulation results. But implementing this would require unprecedented cooperation between member species. That's actually another lesson from human military history, Marcus replied. Some of our most decisive victories came from alliances between groups that had been enemies. Shared external threats forced cooperation that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. The hologram shifted to show historical examples, the Allied powers in Earth's World War II, various coalitions against common aggressors throughout human history. In each case, species or nations with different capabilities had found ways to integrate their strengths against superior individual opponents. The Void Hunters assume we'll fight as separate species with competing interests, Marcus continued. If we can truly integrate our capabilities, not just coordinate them, but create genuine combined arms doctrine, we could achieve tactical advantages they haven't prepared for. Instructor Vexhai spoke up from her position at the faculty table. This goes well beyond military tactics. You're proposing a fundamental shift in how the Galactic Defense Council operates. The principles are sound, Marcus acknowledged, but the implementation would be unprecedented. It would require species that have maintained independent military doctrines for millennia to share their deepest tactical secrets and develop truly integrated command structures. Professor Thilnax's crystalline form resonated with new harmonic patterns. The technical challenges alone would be staggering. Different species have incompatible communication systems, command protocols, and equipment standards. True, Marcus agreed, but those are engineering problems, not conceptual ones. The greater challenge is psychological, getting military commanders to trust allied species with capabilities they don't fully understand. Admiral Kretak's bioluminescent patches had shifted to patterns Marcus had never seen before. Cadet Chen, what you're proposing isn't just military reform. It's a fundamental restructuring of galactic defense philosophy. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. Ma'am, 6 weeks ago I was just trying to demonstrate that humans might have something to contribute to advanced military education. But the research has led to conclusions I never expected. He gestured to the holographic display showing comparative analyses, tactical simulations, and strategic projections. Every species in this chamber has developed unique solutions to the challenges of conflict and survival. Individually, we're all vulnerable to opponents with specific advantages. But, integrated properly, our diverse capabilities could create tactical systems more effective than anything any single species has achieved. The Bow Principle, Commander Torvin observed thoughtfully. Simple individual components combine to create capabilities greater than the sum of their parts. Exactly, Marcus replied. The Bow taught humans that innovation often comes from combining existing elements in new ways, not from developing completely new technologies. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs now, not better weapons, but better integration of what we already have. The chamber fell silent as the faculty processed the implications of Marcus's presentation.
What had started as a simple demonstration of primitive weapons technology had evolved into a comprehensive proposal for restructuring galactic military doctrine. Finally, Admiral Kretak spoke.
Cadet Chen, the Galactic Defense Council will review your findings. In the meantime, I'm authorizing the establishment of an integrated tactics research program with you as the primary coordinator. Marcus felt his knees weaken slightly.
Ma'am, I'm honored, but I'm still just a cadet exchange student. Not anymore, the Admiral replied, her bioluminescent patches shifting to patterns of formal decision. Consider yourself promoted to the research faculty, with full authority to recruit specialists from any member species. Your mission is to develop practical implementations of these asymmetric integration principles. The formal ceremony that followed seemed almost surreal to Marcus. As he accepted his new rank and responsibilities, he thought about the simple bow he had built from classroom materials just weeks before. Sometimes, he realized, the most profound changes started with the simplest actions.
That evening, as Marcus worked late in his new research laboratory, he was joined by the cadets who had become his closest collaborators.
Zextai, Nixera, Thorn, and even Kalen, who had become one of the most enthusiastic supporters of the integration project. So, Zextai buzzed, what's our first priority for saving the galaxy? Marcus smiled, looking at the diverse group of beings who had become his research team.
We start with what we know works. We build a bow. A bow? Kalen's scales showed confusion.
But, we're designing fleet tactics now. Same principles, Marcus replied, pulling up a new set of design specifications on the laboratory's holographic display. We find the components that work individually, figure out how to make them work together, and create something more effective than what anyone expects. As his alien colleagues gathered around the display, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first day in weapons technology class. The bow had been just the beginning, a simple demonstration that had opened doors to possibilities none of them had imagined.
Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they worked to transform theoretical principles into practical military applications.
But tonight, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy who had learned to see past the limitations of their individual species, Marcusjan felt ready for whatever came next. The human had built a bow from classroom supplies. Now, together, they were going to build something even more ambitious, a future where the galaxy's diverse species could stand united against any threat.